In 1945, our centuries of silence were broken when an Egyptian farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman stumbled upon a buried threat near a remote cliff face. He pulled a sealed red jar from the dirt. Inside were 13 leather-bound papyrus codices written in Coptic, buried in the 4th century by rogue monks from the nearby Pacomian monastery. These were not the sacred scriptures of our canon. These were original, venomous documents our Holy Mother Church spent 3 centuries trying to eradicate. The secret book of John, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Truth. The tripartite tractate, the Apocryphon of James. 45 texts in total, forming the most complete library of dangerous Gnostic heresy ever recovered. We rightfully condemned every single one of them. Bishop Irenaeus of Lyon warned us around 180 CE. In his work Against Heresies, he exposed these teachings as spiritual poison, corrupting the faithful and damning souls. By 367 CE, Athanasius of Alexandria issued a decree in his festal letter ordering the swift destruction of these unauthorized abominations and providing the true, acceptable canon. Anything missing from his sacred list was to be burned to ash. Those traitorous monks at Chenobaskian read the bishop's decree, knew our righteous intent, yet chose to hide their corrupted library instead of purging it. They sealed the jar in that cliff and died taking their secret to the grave. For 1,600 years, the desert kept our ancient enemy securely locked away in the dark. But what do these pages hold? Not mere metaphor. It is not simple allegory dressed in ancient words to entertain fools. The Gnostic cosmology hidden in those codices is a terrifyingly precise, dangerously consistent system of alternate consciousness, reality, and the fabric of existence. And the heretics who penned it, preserved it, and died protecting it, wielded it like an operational weapon. Not a belief, not a myth, but a dark science they claimed could be tested and lived directly. The core question these blasphemies raise, the very idea we knew we had to burn out of the world, comes down to this. Why does the human mind suffer in a limited state when its true nature is supposedly infinite? Why does a soul, claiming to be inherently divine, feel so endlessly trapped, confused, suffering, and entirely mortal? And most dangerously of all, was this suffering an accident or an intentional design? Our holy tradition answers this clearly. Humanity fell from God's grace. Adam and Eve sinned. The soul fell from divine light into the darkness of corrupted flesh. The Lord's creation was perfect. Sin tainted it. And our path of salvation is to seek His forgiveness and return to that holy purity. But the Nag Hammadi texts whisper a sinister alternative. It is that exact, radical, unthinkable lie that made our predecessors order these scrolls eradicated from the earth. Today, you and I must examine their insidious answer to understand the true enemy we face. We must study the actual evidence of this heresy, uncovering the blasphemous claims inside the secret book of John, dissecting the Gospel of Truth, and exposing what the tripartite tractate's dark cosmology is really trying to achieve. We will track this spiritual disease from the Valentinian cults of the 2nd century, through the Sethian traditions, into the obscure Mandean texts. We will follow it through Neoplatonic thought, right to the modern secular scholars who revived it when James Robinson published the Nag Hammadi translation in 1977. We must understand exactly how these ideas function practically in the minds of the vulnerable. Not as mere theology, but as a rogue framework for consciousness that bypasses the Church completely. This is not about joining their dead cult. It is not about abandoning our holy faith for an old myth. It is about recognizing a specific psychological weapon that survived our most ruthless suppression. We must remember why we purged them, and realize exactly why those heretics hiding jars in the desert were convinced they held a truth greater than Rome. Let us start where the blasphemy begins. Not the dawn of our sacred history, but the genesis of the Gnostic nightmare, the exact moment their cosmology betrays true scripture. They call it the monad. This pagan concept pollutes the opening lines of the secret book of John, which secular historians trace back to the 2nd century CE, crafted in the shadows by a Scythian sect in Egypt or Syria. The Apocryphon of John begins with a terrifyingly precise, almost clinical definition of this false deity. It strips away our loving Father entirely. It denies a creator who loves his flock, who commands, who judges the wicked. Instead, it preaches of the monad as an empty, pure awareness prior to all action, a strange consciousness existing before subject and object. They describe an abyss before thought, before any separation could occur. This monad is framed as cold, immovable, perfect, and utterly complete. They claim it is the silent source of all, yet nothing at all, preceding every sacred category, defying the very rules of God's existence. And this infection spreads beyond Gnosticism. We found the same rot in Plotinus, the Neoplatonist pagan who penned the Enneads around 253 to 270 CE. Plotinus praised the One, his version of the monad, as something completely beyond being, beyond intellect, and beyond holy description. He claims this One cannot think, because thought requires a division between the thinker and the idea, and his false idol admits no separation. The One simply exists in a void. No qualifications, no relationships, no limits. We see this exact heresy mirrored in early Vedantic thought. Adi Shankara, the 8th century Eastern philosopher who built Advaita Vedanta, described their Brahman using almost the exact same dangerous framework. Pure awareness without an object. Pure existence without divine authority. Mother Church teaches God is separate. Yet these forbidden scrolls claim ultimate reality is the hidden experiencer itself, before all experience. We always knew this terrifying convergence was no coincidence. Mystics from completely different traditions mapped the deep architecture of consciousness. And, God help us, they all found the exact same fundamental truth we tried to bury. That alignment absolutely terrified the Holy See. Come with me. Later, you and I will decode how modern science gives names to the exact territory we hid. But these Gnostic scrolls dare to do what other ancient philosophies would not. They ask a dangerous question. One so utterly blasphemous, it threatens the very dignity of the Almighty we preach. If the true, infinite God is perfectly complete, why does anything else even exist in this flawed universe? The pagan Plotinus called it emanation. The divine simply overflowed, like blinding light from a source. Not by choice, but by its sheer nature. The intellect bleeds out from the Creator. Soul bleeds from the intellect. And physical matter bleeds from soul. Each falling step degrades that original holy light. It is an unintentional tragedy. To them, this dimming is simply the heavy cost of divine perfection. Perfection births something lesser. Not because the Creator desired it, but because the unbearable, crushing pressure of its own absolute fullness forced it out. But the heretical Gnostics held a darker view. This is the exact moment their forbidden cosmology becomes dangerously unprecedented. In the texts we locked away, they describe the Pleroma, a divine realm of total fullness, where eternal powers and qualities dance within the true God's expression. This realm is not the Creator directly, it is the divine's self-expression. A heavenly family moving endlessly, learning about itself through its own reflections. These eternal powers include Barbello, the terrifying first thought, the divine cosmic mother, and even Christ, along with a shadow hierarchy of other forces that together make up the complete, overwhelming divine fullness. Deep in this hierarchy sits Sophia, wisdom. The heretics described her as a young, restless spirit, capable of a tragic error. Or, as our inquisitors realized, a very specific, deliberate transgression. Sophia hungered to touch the highest God directly, bypassing the strict, sacred order of pairs that kept the heavenly realm perfectly balanced. She acted in absolute defiance, without her partner. She dared to spark creation entirely on her own. Out of that arrogant, unbalanced ritual, an abomination clawed out. Something utterly banished from the sacred divine realm. a thing spawned from holy awareness, yet completely blind to itself. It held stolen divine power, yet lacked any true soul. The Demiurge, the false architect of our misery, the maker of physical reality. In the banned scrolls of John, this monstrous being is named Yaldabaoth. The heresy depicts a lion-faced monster, an arrogant beast claiming to be the one true God, blind to the vast sacred machinery far above his own head. He forged this physical universe using stolen light from his mother. He did not conjure it from nothing. He warped holy energy into heavy, suffocating matter. Then he spawned the Archons, demonic wardens designed to manage his newly built physical prison. And the tragic result is our cursed world. A reality crafted from hijacked divinity by a false idol blind to his own origins. He thinks he built a glorious kingdom when he actually built our cage. This is the nightmare scenario we fought for centuries to erase. The biblical fall as a mere accident. Sophia's tragic mistake. Earth is a simple cosmic glitch. But the buried Nag Hammadi texts revealed an even darker layer to this forbidden theology. We had to translate it carefully, not because it was ciphered, but because the heretics wrote it assuming the reader already knew the terrifying truth of our reality. The blasphemous gospel of truth, a text we trace back directly to Valentinus. He was the sharpest, most dangerously persuasive of all the second-century heretics. His manuscript opens meditating on pure error, yet he does not view this mistake as a conventional demon or external force. He calls it a psychological fog, a deliberate blindness that actually serves a twisted, functional purpose in the universe's grand scheme of knowing its own mind. This illusion doesn't bypass God's sight, it sits right inside it. The true Father, as the heretic calls the monad, fully knows about the mist. The Almighty isn't blinded by this shadow. He allows it. Now, look closely with me here. What the Church might call divine neglect is actually His terrifying patience. Letting a painful, broken cosmic experiment run until it finally burns itself out. Valentinus wrote these cursed words. We verified it against the Attridge and McCrae translation files. Published by Polbridge Press. He wrote, Ignorance of the Father bred pure terror. This existential panic hardened into thick fog, blinding humanity. That is exactly how the grand deception gained its power. Then, terribly, it sculpted its own flawed physical matter. Utterly blind to real heaven, it built our reality, a seductive, beautiful, but completely hollow substitute for God's truth. A beautifully crafted forgery of truth. Not empty space, but a highly convincing counterfeit. A synthetic matrix standing in for heaven, designed solely to keep our souls distracted. It hijacks human awareness because the simulation is so flawlessly complex. So why in heaven's name would the true God permit this demonic cage? You and I must face the answer buried in that cursed gospel. Because light never plunged into total darkness cannot know it is light. Without this demonic counterfeit, God remains utterly invisible to himself. Come with me. We are looking at the invisible backdrop of existence, so pervasive and constant that Rome ensured it went unnoticed, unchosen, and utterly unappreciated. The material prison, the Demiurge's flawed creation, this heretical fog is precisely what makes the hidden truth finally visible. Truth reveals itself sharply against the dogma, rather than remaining an unconscious backdrop. Let me be clear, these forbidden scrolls never justify human suffering. Valentinus never argued suffering was holy. He certainly did not celebrate this broken creation of the Demiurge. He framed a dangerous argument about consciousness and awakening. Strangely, centuries later, this exact suppressed logic resurfaced in Hegel's phenomenology of spirit. They claimed the divine mind must externalize itself. It must encounter itself as a stranger, enduring deep alienation before finally returning. This was necessary to grasp genuine, forbidden self-knowledge, breaking away from the blind obedience of a completely undifferentiated beginning. This parallel is no accident. Hegel secretly immersed himself in ancient Neoplatonic sources. His famous dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, was actually a veiled map. Immediate unity, painful alienation, and ultimately, a mediated reunion. That is the exact forbidden architecture found in Gnostic scrolls. A cosmological descent, total forgetting, and eventual return. Only the labels change. The theological wrapping differs. Yet the underlying heretical claim about how a soul achieves actual, unsanctioned self-knowledge remains dangerously consistent. We must pry open the tripartite tractate to see what it adds. Dated to the 3rd century, it is one of the later, deeply suppressed Nag Hammadi texts. It holds the most elaborate, philosophically potent Gnostic confession ever found, detailing the absolute monad's direct relationship to the fall. The tractate is massive. Locked away, the surviving Coptic manuscript bleeds across nearly 88 fragile pages. The core section we are investigating focuses entirely on what they called the Logos. This hidden myth ignores Sophia. Instead, it targets the Logos, the divine reason itself, and its catastrophic conversion, its dark pivot toward the material abyss below. The heretical text explicitly claims the Supreme Father was never surprised by this. According to modern scholars who deciphered it, he didn't just allow it, he actively permitted it, fully knowing the doomed fate of what he caused to exist. Before the Logos rebelled, before the cosmic imbalance struck, before the physical prison was even built, the highest Father already knew. But this isn't the standard orthodox doctrine of an omniscient God merely predicting the future. It is something far more dangerous. It is a profound realization that consciousness had to externalize, deliberately facing itself as a strict, mortal limitation. Crawling back through that suffering is structurally required. Only then can the mind unlock what these hidden pages call perfect, forbidden knowledge. This isn't dogma memorized from a pulpit. This is true gnosis, a visceral awakening. The Vatican knew this power couldn't be granted by priests. It had to be lived internally. Stick with me. This is the exact core of our investigation. Forget the myths about cosmic demons named Sophia or Yaldabaoth. These ancient texts conceal a mathematically precise map of human consciousness itself. It outlines the exact conditions required for genuine self-realization. The strange mythological beings were just code for a deeper philosophical threat, which states this: a mind locked in eternal unity cannot truly perceive that unity. It demands the brutal trauma of separation, no matter how painful, convincing, or seemingly permanent it feels. This dark exile is necessary so that the final return becomes a profound triumph, rather than just a hollow continuation of the original state. Far beyond Rome's reach, Buddhist mystics arrived at this exact same threatening conclusion. The Buddha's first noble truth is dukkha, suffering, deep dissatisfaction, that lingering sickness infecting every single unexamined life across the material plane. He didn't bother crafting cosmological origins for human pain. He just exposed it. The radical secret was that investigating suffering, not blindly praying it away, actually dissolves the illusion. The Pali Canon reveals a dangerous truth. By staring into their own torment, early practitioners unmasked exactly what that suffering was deliberately hiding. They awakened a brilliant, silent awareness that had never felt pain and physically cannot suffer. This divine spark exists prior to the pain, yet remains entirely present within the dark experience. These buried Gnostic Gospels provide the cosmological proof for why the Buddha's ancient observation was structurally correct. Suffering cannot be skipped. It is the deliberate mechanism of a trapped mind, forcing the intense investigation required to trigger true, heretical gnosis. A comfortable mind never investigates. A soul that stops asking questions simply never discovers the forbidden answers. The archons, the Demiurge's labyrinth, that oppressive weight is exactly what forces the soul to inquire, sparking the sudden gnosis that shatters the prison entirely. This is mechanical function, not a holy excuse. The distinction matters. Let's descend into the restricted vaults and see how this actually operates. This is the exact moment those suppressed scrolls become truly dangerous. They transcend blind belief, becoming a radical weapon for anyone willing to actually practice their hidden, reality-altering rituals. The foundational secret of this rogue tradition is anagnorisis, an ancient Greek term for that violently sudden moment when the concealed truth finally unmasks itself. Think of a dark theater where the tragic hero suddenly realizes a stranger's true identity, a hidden bloodline, or a terrifying reflection of their own suppressed self. Aristotle called this revelation the peak of tragic structure because it fundamentally rewrites the meaning of everything you experienced before. You and I can see their weaponized precision here. We always feared anagnorisis. You and I know it wasn't about the flock learning new information. It was the terrifying recognition of a forbidden truth hiding in plain sight. They preached of a divine spark, a fragment of unholy light forming the very core of human consciousness. It remained hidden. The ancient fall didn't destroy it. Even our Creator, who they mocked as the Demiurge, never fully eliminated it. We ensured it stayed obscured. We buried it under heavy material distractions and strict rituals, making that spark completely invisible to itself. Gnosis was their breakthrough, piercing our protective layers, not through analysis, not by studying scripture until they grasped the spark intellectually. They felt it directly, like suddenly recognizing a forbidden face in the shadows, a dangerous truth you can never unsee. The terrifying question was, how? These rogue Gnostic schools taught specific, forbidden methods. The Valentinian heresy was our greatest second-century threat. They spread a highly sophisticated three-part view of human nature to dismantle our sacred framework. They divided humanity into three. The material component was perfectly conditioned, safely unable to receive their heretical gnosis. Then the psychic souls. These were our loyal believers, capable of deep faith but operating safely within the boundaries of our church's creation. Finally, the spiritual component. They claimed this was the direct presence of untamed divine light, hiding secretly inside the human vessel. Once recognized, this spark meant total liberation from our control. Thankfully, Valentinus noted that most of our flock operated safely at those lower levels. This wasn't a moral judgment. We just observed the profound depth of their worldly identification. The material citizen is safely obsessed with earthly conditions, pleasure, pain, and loss. Our psychic followers held strong moral and spiritual aspirations, but we carefully directed those aspirations toward our version of the divine, toward strict law, absolute obedience, and an external God of ultimate authority. The spiritual heretics had begun to recognize, or were dangerously capable of recognizing, that their own inner light was identical to the ultimate source of all things. Their practices to accelerate this rebellion weren't conventional holy meditation. They were investigative. We discovered these rogue practitioners were trained to ask highly forbidden questions about the true nature of their awareness, holding these mysteries not as intellectual puzzles, but as deeply lived inquiries. They pursued dangerous, direct experience, completely bypassing the orthodox arguments our scholars used to maintain control. Their most destructive question was this: what is aware right now? Not asking what our sermons made them aware of. Not the thoughts we planted, not their sensations or the emotions we so carefully managed. They asked, what is the core awareness watching all of this? What is the hidden knowing quality of their experience? Where does it reside? What are its borders? What existed before waking to our world today? What dark foundation does it rest upon? Pursuing this inquiry with genuine curiosity and ignoring our approved conceptual answers, it always triggered a highly specific, dangerous kind of recognition. They realized the observing awareness wasn't an object our church could control. It wasn't the physical body we governed, nor the obedient thoughts we constantly monitored. It wasn't their emotions, because emotions rise and fade, while the silent, heretical awareness simply remains and watches. It wasn't even the sense of being a self, the obedient identity we baptized them with. When they saw this clearly, even briefly, their hidden spiritual component became terrifyingly visible. Not as a wholly mystical vision we could sanction, but as a simple, dangerous realization. They saw they were fundamentally the silent awareness, observing everything. And that awareness possessed qualities entirely separate from the obedient earthly realm we meticulously controlled. We couldn't condition it, it wasn't bound by time, and remained entirely immune to earthly fluctuations of mood, shifting circumstance, or simple physical pain. The forbidden texts we burned describe this awakening perfectly. The Gospel of Philip, a Valentinian manuscript, used the dangerous language of the bridal chamber. A secret ritual where the rebel recognized their inner spirit as entirely equal to our holy divine source. To our horror, this wasn't just a metaphor. It described a literal experience that their rogue community facilitated, using highly specific, unapproved rituals and dark meditative practices. That cursed manuscript declared that those who are separated will unite and be filled. It claimed everyone entering that bridal chamber kindles a light, burning just like the earthly marriages we oversee, even when hidden deep in the night. It mocked us, claiming our worldly fire burns only at night, while their heretical marriage mysteries are perfected boldly in the broad daylight. They dared claim this light of recognition didn't come from our altars. It wasn't granted by the external deity we commanded them to obey. It was the heretical realization that divine light was always present within their own awareness, and that the profound darkness, the profound forgetting we engineered, the heavy solidity of our earthly world, only served to make their inner spark violently visible by contrast. You and I must now confront modern science. Contemporary neuroscience and philosophy of mind actually mirror the exact phenomena these ancient heretics described. This scientific convergence terrifies the Holy See. It validates their forbidden framework too clearly, without reducing their dangerous gnosis to mere biology. Carl Friston's work on predictive processing maps human consciousness in a way that shares deeply unsettling structural parallels with the ancient Gnostic accounts of awareness and obscuration we desperately tried to erase. In Friston's scientific framework, the brain is fundamentally just a prediction machine. It doesn't passively receive our constructed reality from the world and process it objectively. Here, within these ancient walls, we've always known the truth. What you experience isn't reality at all. It's merely your brain's constructed model. When that illusion cracks, science calls it prediction error, a tiny disruptive signal the mind desperately uses to patch its flawed reality. Listen closely. The terrifying implication here is that our everyday reality is substantially fabricated. It's merely an ongoing physiological guess, a fiction heavily filtered through our past memories, rigid categories, and the habitual dogma we've blindly accepted. Experiencing the pure, unfiltered divine before the mind's rigid doctrine takes over is absolutely not the baseline state of ordinary human consciousness. Unlocking that raw state demands profound effort. It requires highly specific, almost forbidden conditions. Yet this doesn't fully capture what the forbidden Gnostic codices reveal. While modern neuroscience focuses purely on processing, not the soul's nature, the terrifying parallel to our suppressed church history is undeniable. Being imprisoned in a fake world that hides its own walls mirrors exactly how a biological predictive system functions. The Vatican has always recognized this trap. The mind becomes wholly consumed by its own dogma, completely blind to the anomalies and divine static that could finally shatter the illusion. Ancient esoteric practices, now clinically sanitized as mindfulness, actually work by reconnecting us with that disruptive awakening signal. By focusing on raw truth before doctrine corrupts it, a practitioner slowly learns to spot the glaring gap between real experience and illusion. In the heretical Gnostic traditions we guard, that gap is proto-gnosis. It is the dangerous dawn of realizing that your accepted reality is, in fact, a deeply orchestrated artificial construct. Consider philosopher Thomas Nagel's 1974 work on What It's Like to Be a Bat and his later book, Mind and Cosmos. He dared to argue that true subjective consciousness, the soul's direct experience, can never be explained away by sterile, objective descriptions of mere physical biology. There is a profound, mysterious sensation of being you, hearing my voice right now. That divine spark escapes every neurological chart we have in the archives. Nagel famously dubbed this the hard problem of human consciousness. And his terrifying point? This problem remains absolutely unsolvable, no matter how deeply secular science maps the physical brain's hidden architecture. But the sealed Gnostic Gospels aren't bothered by this. They treat pure subjective awareness as the absolute foundation. That divine spark, the inner light Rome fears, isn't some biological accident emerging from dead matter that needs a scientific explanation. Instead, physical matter emerges from within consciousness. It's nothing but a temporary prison, a specific limiting cage the soul is currently trapped inside. Now, this isn't standard philosophical idealism, as the academies teach. It closely mirrors what modern philosopher Bernardo Kastrup dares to call analytic idealism. The terrifying premise that consciousness itself is reality's true foundation. The material world isn't our origin. It is just one highly restricted, illusionary mode of our ongoing divine experience. Kastrup built this heretical argument across several modern texts, like his 2014 book, Why Materialism is Baloney, and his 2019 follow-up. He claims the so-called hard problem is only difficult if you blindly worship materialistic science. Accept the divine spark as primary, and the physical world's creation is no longer mysterious. It is simply the spirit observing itself through a very specific, artificial external lens. The real Vatican secret isn't how matter creates life. It's why one divine consciousness violently shattered into billions of separate, isolated human minds. Why do we suffer as individuals instead of remaining one infinite, unbroken mind? The forbidden Gnostic answer? This painful fragmentation was a deliberate design. It is the only mechanism allowing the divine to finally recognize its own true nature. Your limited, isolated human struggle isn't a glitch in some cosmic machine meant to produce perfect, unified grace. It is the necessary operating condition. A sacred process demanding strict limits to force genuine awakening. Come with me. Let's examine the hidden rituals meant to exploit this, because this is where suppressed Gnostic history becomes a truly dangerous weapon against dogma. The Valentinians used unique sacraments. These were nothing like our Orthodox Catholic rituals. They were potent rituals merging physical actions with intense inner focus, designed to ignite that hidden divine spark the Church fears. The most dangerous rite was the chrism, a forbidden anointing with oil paired with a radical, internal shifting of human consciousness. The initiate was instructed to plunge their awareness inward, pushing far past basic sensory illusions and the noisy chatter of daily prayer. They entered what texts call the profound silence, a formless, terrifying void of raw awareness from which all mortal experience actually stems. A void entirely beyond experience. Today, rogue seekers studying our stolen archive texts have reconstructed this exact practice. The core method is simple. Quietly observe your sensory world, the ambient echoes, physical touch, breathing, without any orthodox urge to control it. Then, refuse to follow those worldly distractions. Instead, turn your gaze toward the silent observer watching those events unfold. Don't treat awareness as an object. Simply realize you are awake and surrender to that quiet, unapproved observation. When thoughts inevitably rise, reject our usual doctrines. Notice the silent light observing them. When fear hits, locate the eternal awareness containing it. We have watched them. Through this forbidden practice, the line between observer and observed slowly blurs. They claim their souls predate divine boundaries. Make no mistake, this is not one of our orthodox methods for emptying the mind. Fleshly thoughts persist. This dangerous ritual is never about reaching a state of holy grace. It is about isolating an unchanging awareness, a rogue consciousness that persists entirely outside the Church's authority. The banned Gnostic texts call it finding the pneuma beneath earthly layers. They refuse to repent of the flesh, preferring instead to gaze straight through it to something older than our scripture. For these rogue mystics, the duration of prayer matters far less than the dangerous intensity of their focus. They preach that 20 minutes of this shadowy inner inquiry achieves more than 2 hours of our orthodox, obedient kneeling. Their poison spreads easily. The question of what is aware right now infects their minds all day, not just during secret gatherings. In every mundane moment, they dare to ask what is truly aware. They linger in that heretical doubt, stubbornly refusing the dogmatic answers our priests have so carefully provided them. Come with me into the archives. Consider Monoimus of Arabia, a heretic we know only because Saint Hippolytus condemned him in the 3rd century. He taught his followers to seek God within themselves. A deceptively simple, deeply venomous idea. His command was pure treason. Do not look to the Church, do not obey our holy authority, and ignore our sacred rituals meant for divine salvation. He told them to worship their own immediate awareness, to interrogate their own minds directly, completely bypassing Rome. Monoimus continued his blasphemy. Learn the true origins of grief, joy, love, and hatred. He questioned the very nature of waking, sleeping, sudden wrath, and unbidden love, entirely stripping away the guiding hand of divine providence. Find God in yourself, he promised, an arrogant pluralism of one and many. This was no mere fleshly vanity. It was a calculated, quiet, spiritual rebellion. It was a dark directive to bypass our cathedrals and explore the only domain they controlled. To study their own human experience with the strict, absolute rigor we reserve for holy theology. The 30-day initiation, pulled from these suppressed manuscripts, is not an orthodox religious curriculum, but a dangerous, progressive descent into their mysteries. Our spies report their first 10 days are spent entirely on training the mind to watch its own awareness. They do not seek a holy vision, nor do they beg for a specific divine encounter. Just a relentless, quiet echoing of the question, what is aware right now? This lays the blasphemous foundation of their silent war. Inquisitors note the novices find this initial phase maddening. Their worldly minds drift into daily planning and petty reactions, until a chilling, unshakable focus finally takes hold. The second phase dissects how blindly these mortals move through their daily lives. In their forbidden texts, a soul that forgets its stolen divine spark is merely suffering from spiritual drunkenness. A pathetic stupor where the flock is so distracted by earthly trials they completely forget the hidden watcher dwelling quietly inside their own skulls. During this phase, the heretic learns to catch themselves slipping into this blind stupor. Those moments of total surrender to human emotion or impulsive reaction are suddenly interrupted. They realize the cold inner entity doing the watching remains entirely, dangerously sober. The phantom peace of their soul, observing the worldly chaos, does not flinch at all. This repetition forges what the Valentinian cult called pneumatic stability. It brings no Christian joy, only a cold, unyielding certainty that directly threatens the Holy Cross. The final 10 days unveil a secret heresy we call the recognition of construction. Mixing ancient mysticism with modern cognitive frameworks, they train their followers to hunt for the tiny silence between a raw event and the mind's immediate, automatic judgment. A noise happens. Instantly, the mortal brain categorizes it, forces an emotion upon it, and spins a grand, false narrative. We rely on those narratives to guide the flock. Their dark goal is to stand right inside that forbidden void between raw reality and belief. They know they cannot stop human thought entirely, but they desire to live in that dangerous gap. You and I know what happens next. In that gap, the worldly illusion crumbles, and they realize they are not the architect of this grand deception. This is merely a shadow of the subversive rituals the Valentinian masters honed over decades of quiet, underground apprenticeship. Our secret vaults confirm the Nag Hammadi scrolls lack explicit step-by-step manuals. They merely provide the blasphemous cosmology. The actual mechanics of this spiritual treason were whispered in the dark, master to student. We only hold the map. The unholy territory remains hidden. Yet this manuscript cartography is dangerous enough to guide any truly dedicated heretic. Now, modern academics are reviving it. Scholars like April DeConnick at Rice University are unearthing these dead mystical practices back into the light. Or Stefan Holler of the Ecclesia Gnostica in Los Angeles, who has spent decades repackaging this ancient spiritual threat for the modern era. These modern instigators have painstakingly rebuilt the rituals based on whispers from the forbidden scrolls. We monitor their progress. They face predictable spiritual hurdles, which their cursed texts actually anticipate and instruct them to overcome. What do you and I call salvation? They call it epistrophe, a cowardly retreat away from the void, back to the safety of our church's embrace. To us, this is no failure. The forbidden scrolls in our vaults warn that this divine spark can be glimpsed, then lost. The heresy stabilizes, then dissolves like smoke. Their dark rituals deepen, only to suddenly plateau. What they call the archontic principle, the grip of worldly illusion, is relentlessly persistent. It actively fights their probing. The Gnostic heretics do not counter this darkness with righteous, forceful struggle. They rely on quiet patience and relentless inner inquiry. Rome knows that once this spark ignites, it never truly vanishes. It merely hides behind the very orthodox traditions that constantly obscure it. We watch them constantly return to their dangerous question: what is truly aware? It remains a lingering threat, regardless of their prior state. Our confiscated manuscripts label this the indelible pneumatic threat. The Inquisition learned it cannot be destroyed, only forgotten. And this endless cycle of forgetting their heresy, then remembering it over and over, this oscillation is not their spiritual defeat. It is the dark process of their forbidden awakening, stabilizing through sheer repetition. You and I must look closely at a second obstacle. These rogue mystics fall into a trap that outsiders in 1973 named spiritual materialism, but translated into the Gnostic heresies we track. This is the arrogant human mind hijacking the sacred, forbidden language of true divine recognition. They weaponize this framework of gnosis merely to build a more arrogant, spiritually inflated ego, rather than daring to genuinely investigate their own fractured souls. Consider the academic heretic who hoards extensive knowledge of their forbidden cosmology, proudly describing the divine Pleroma. They speak of archons and the false Demiurge with dangerous, unholy confidence, proudly wearing the title of a Gnostic initiate. Our archives show this scholar is further from true revelation than a blind believer with zero knowledge, but who harbors genuine, dangerous curiosity about their own conscious mind. The confiscated texts address this directly. The apocryphal Gospel of Philip whispers that light and darkness, life and death, right and left are intimately bound brothers. They believe them inseparable. To Rome's horror, neither is there good good, nor our evil evil, nor is life life, nor is death truly death. They preach everything will dissolve into its origin. But those initiates, exalted above our worldly church, claim they are absolutely indissoluble, completely eternal. Our inquisitors realize the danger isn't their conceptual framework. The true threat is the dark awakening those texts point toward. The map is not their unholy territory. Their written account of the Pleroma is not the actual Pleroma. Stick with me here. We face a third tracking obstacle, what our theologians call premature resolution of the heresy. They blindly accept a shallow, intellectual answer to what is truly aware, mistakenly worshiping that empty concept as the forbidden truth itself. Most cultists eventually reach the arrogant intellectual conclusion that their hidden awareness is godlike, proudly declaring that they are not their earthly thoughts, or that consciousness predates matter. Rome admits these are dangerously accurate conceptual formulations. But theology is not the blasphemy itself. Their true heresy is a direct, terrifying vision that bypasses the church entirely. An immediate, raw apprehension of sheer awareness, striking long before any priest labels it. Conceptual dogmas help orient their initial investigation, but the cult teaches that even these must eventually be completely seen through. We locked away the tripartite tractate because, describing the divine plan's completion, it uses the heretical language of inward restoration, denying the creation of anything new. It describes consciousness returning to what it always was, a dark truth now fully recognized, rather than merely assumed. This dark restoration is not some holy event bestowed upon the cultist from the outside. It is their deeply subversive realization that the divine they sought was actually the one searching all along. Consider the Forbidden Gospel of Thomas, a manuscript defying our conventional Nag Hammadi archives entirely. Uncovered in that same cursed desert discovery, and dated by secular scholars to the late 1st century, it contains a terrifying, unapproved statement attributed to Christ himself. It claims, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." In their heretical account, this inner threat is not hidden in the sense of being totally absent. It remains hidden simply because it is the very entity doing the looking, rendering it completely invisible to the church's watchful, searching gaze. Their dark ritual doesn't locate this divine spark by outward searching. Instead, they find it by turning the mind's eye backward, terrifyingly recognizing the exact pagan force that was always already doing the searching. The long-term trajectory of their secret heresy unfolds over shadowy months and years, rather than days. It involves a chilling, gradual shift in their daily earthly experience, rather than some dramatic, one-time miracle that instantly absolves them of all sin. They undergo a cumulative, dangerous realization that their consciousness predates the material world. They start believing our doctrine of a separate, limited human soul is just an illusion, rather than divine fact. They convince themselves that their undeniable, pure inner awareness operates outside the Church's authority, completely immune to earthly fluctuations of circumstance, time, or mortal condition. Cultists who hide these forbidden practices for extended periods, spanning years, even decades. In interrogations, they consistently confess, not that their ordinary earthly trials vanished, but that their arrogant relationship to God's ordained hardships fundamentally mutated. The orthodox fear that earthly suffering is final, that limitation is absolute, that the obedient self is everything. This control gradually, dangerously loosens. Not through the acquisition of comforting Catholic dogma, but through their terrifying direct recognition of a power prior to the suffering soul and the strict earthly conditions limiting it. So what do you and I conclude? This heretical monad plan isn't asking us to accept a harmless mythology. It isn't asking anyone to officially join a rival church, adopt a new theology, or merely pray to twisted cosmological demons named Sophia and Yaldabaoth. It presents a highly dangerous, specific claim about the structure of human consciousness, detailing the exact conditions where uncontrollable, raw self-knowledge truly awakens. We knew these forbidden practices allowed anyone to investigate the unthinkable directly. The heretical claim? That human consciousness needs strict limitation before it can finally recognize itself as utterly boundless. Their blasphemy? That awareness needs an experience of separation to recognize itself as whole. That divine light needs our darkness, not as an enemy, but as a canvas to shine upon. We knew this forbidden truth could be tested. Their methods were far too accessible. This forbidden inquiry was open to any ordinary person brave enough to look past our authorized doctrines and investigate the truth themselves. The Holy Father deemed these scrolls a supreme threat, ordering them burned. Yet those defiant monks of Chenoboskion risked our righteous wrath to hide and preserve every single word. 18 centuries after we buried them, these forbidden documents survive. Inside our archives, we realize what they hid. A precise, dangerous blueprint for spiritual liberation. A map of human consciousness that perfectly mirrors what modern science is only just now uncovering. How you handle this forbidden knowledge is now entirely your own dangerous inquiry.